Hi everyone. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me for a second time. Thank you for Sia for hosting, and thank you all for coming. Um, I want to talk today about, or I'm going to. I'm not. I don't even want to. I'm going to talk today about very basically about deploying 11T automatically, and a method auspiciously called continuous deployment, which is a big and scary and complicated sounding thing and a big and complicated, potentially complicated process, but it doesn't have to be. And I want to explain how the small parts of the big complicated thing can help just about any website, just about any 11D site. I'm going to go over the basic concepts involved in continuous deployment and demystify some of the accurate but oblique terminology involved. Hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll have a basic understanding of continuous deployment and how you can deploy 11T more easily and automatically. I'm Michael Delaney. I've been a professional web developer for about 25 years, almost entirely at agencies targeting small to medium businesses, building brochure sites and e-commerce sites to small to medium businesses, which usually means I'm working in WordPress or some other monolithic CMS. But I absolutely love 11T. I love being as close to the code as 11T lets me be. And I really think that for most of the sites that I build, we really don't need anything more complicated than 11T. It's just that we sold something more complicated than 11T. Um, I really enjoy helping people get started on things, and I enjoy helping remove steps from people's daily task lists that aren't part of doing the work. So if you're a writer, you're not necessarily an infrastructure. I'm going to say infrastructure engineer. Nobody's an infrastructure. No, nobody on here is an infrastructure engineer for 11T. Like that's not the thing you're doing with 11T. So one of the things I like to do in my life and times is to take out steps that aren't someone's expertise and are a pain and automate them, give tools to automate them. I like removing manual steps from processes that are easy to miss. And I and automating deployment from Git and GitHub has been a focus of mine in professional roles. I try to contribute that drive to the 11T community wherever I can. That's a little about me. Concepts. There's going to be a few pages of concepts here, and I realize some of this might be familiar to you, some or all of this might be familiar to me, but I want to be sure that I cover the concepts involved for anyone who might be new to it. Version control, starting right off, version control. Version control is important, but very simply put, version control is a comprehensive history of the changes made to your site. In 11T, this is often both site code and site content. If you're keeping your site in Markdown files alongside your templates and your CSS and your JavaScript, then that's in version control too, hopefully. Git is an industry standard piece of software for keeping files in version control. Most everyone at this point, if you're working on websites professionally, you've used Git. I have seen some discussion on the Discord about wanting to get more familiar with Git and why and when and how to use Git. So I want to make sure that, again, covering concepts. And GitHub is a massively popular Microsoft-owned, free-to-use hosted software service that provides Git, which is version control software. Continuing with concepts. Continuous integration and continuous deployment are daunting terms, and I want to try to break down what they mean and how they fit together. Some of these terms, I want to go through some of these terms and then sort of demystify them, hopefully. Integration. Really what we're talking about here, integration is just typing npm run build on your 11T site. That's integration. We call it integration because you're regularly rebuilding your site and integrating your changes as you work. 11D is designed with this kind of workflow in mind, and if you use a development process that automatically refreshes your browser when you save a change, you're already doing this while you work. So let's expand it to deployment. Artifacts. Artifacts are your underscore site directory or whatever the directory your 11D site puts the output files in. It's just the product of npm run build. In 11D, that's most often the underscore site directory. In continuous integration and deployment, we treat artifacts as disposable snapshots of how our code existed at the time of the most recent build. We don't commit build artifacts to version control because they are not source code. They are the product of source code. And we can always just build again with the latest source code. So thinking about your output directory as output only and never handle it. You don't handle it during development. So we're going to try to make sure you don't handle it during deployment either, automatic deployment. I'm going to give you a technical definition of continuous in a moment, but what it really means is that it's a big word for automating a task. That really is all we mean by continuous here. And deployment is pretty straightforward. It's uploading your site to the internet. When we say deploy, we mean upload your files in the very basic term, drag and drop across the FTP screen. That's deploying. And then in product, in pipelines, in continuous integration and deployment pipelines, like the ones I'm describing here, we use a concept of environments. If you're already using, you are already using an environment that we would call development or dev while you're working on your site on your local computer. And every site has a production environment once you put it on the web. More complicated sites might have a staging or QA environment where sites can be reviewed before automatically being deployed to production. But very basically, an environment is your dev or your production or anywhere else that you might put the site for seeing by yourself or other people, a small group, big group, whatever. Here's that technical definition of continuous. Continuous deployment is a software engineering process where every code change is automatically deployed to production without human intervention. The primary aim of continuous deployment is to provide rapid, reliable, and repeatable website delivery, allowing developers to push code changes to users more frequently and with reduced risk. Tools and processes like continuous deployment, because they can scale to support very complicated needs, are often described in a complicated fashion, like on the left of the slide here. What you probably need for your website, whether it's a personal website or even a client website, is probably more similar to what's on the right. But we still call this continuous deployment. It's still a huge benefit to any website build and deploy process. When I say deploy, I mean the act of uploading your site to the web. Whether you are doing that automatically with Git, whether you're doing that with FTP, whether you're doing that with SSH, that's rsync, that's deploying. I want to make this as real and practical and applicable to the work you're doing in 11T every day as possible. So here's where the principles of continuous deployment help anyone working in 11T or anyone working in any website really, but we're talking about 11T. This is a visualization of the difference between a manual deployment pipeline and a continuous deployment pipeline. And I have in my talking notes, discuss pitfalls here, which I can very happily do. On the manual side, we're talking about really any change you make to your site, you then manually, you the developer have to commit that change to GitHub or to Git to version control if you're using that. You have to build the site, type npm run build. You may also want to test the site, make sure that it builds correctly, and then upon maybe hopefully you do all of those things and then deploy your site. Those are all manual steps you have to do in the right order. In a manual deployment setting, because the steps aren't dependent on one another, what's in version control might not match what's on the web at any given time. To me, that's a nightmare scenario. If there's something deployed on the internet because I just dragged and dropped it up from my site and I haven't committed that to Git yet, nightmare. I'd never want that to happen. In a continuous deployment setting, deployment is automated and triggered by version control. Your job is to make changes to your source code and commit those changes to version control. A computer takes it from there. builds your site itself, takes your laptop out of the build and deploy process, tests it to make sure it built correctly, and then uploads the built site to the web to your web host. What's on the web, what's in version control is always what's on the web. Why though? Why would we do this? Why would we go through the trouble when dragging and dropping works great? Separation of concerns is a big reason. You're a web developer or a writer. Write your code, commit your code or your content, let automation take it from there. Like I said before, you're probably not an infrastructure engineer. You may not be great at hand carving servers from metal and software, and you want something to automatically handle that, or creating whatever access you need to secure your deployment process. Let's take that step out of it and let an automated process take over that for you. You can work from anywhere. Your deployment setup, if you're not using automated deployment, is probably on your laptop. You mean that, which means you need to have your laptop with you if you want to make a change to your website. Let's let the cloud handle that. Let's let GitHub handle that. Let's let Netlify handle that. We can hand off that process to a machine that's better at it than we are. You can work with other collaborators. You can invite other writers to be able to, or other developers to make changes to your site. You then don't have to build and deliver their code to the net, did I say the net? Wow, it's 1998 over here. To the internet. You can automate the process. They make their change, site automatically deploys. I said before, what's in Git is what's deployed. That's a really strong peace of mind. Never having to fumble a build artifact up to the FTP server again is a really nice change. Here's a key one. The source never touches the server. This isn't WordPress. We don't need our source code running on our production server. With an automated deployment process, your 11T source code and the SRC directory or wherever you're storing it do not touch the build server or the production server where the finished site is deployed. So if you are in an environment where maybe you are working with a client and you've promised them a website, you maybe haven't promised them the source code for that website. You're delivering a finished product. Here's a great way to do that. Not leak your source code. I think that's great. I don't know if that's useful for anyone else. You never handle the build artifacts. You don't handle them during development while you're writing your code on your local laptop. Don't handle them during deployment. So that's continuous deployment conceptually. Depending on your deployment target, you may already be using these principles. Static site-oriented hosts like Netlify and Cloudflare pages. They need a new name. That's hard to say. Encourage you to set up automatic deployment from GitHub, and those tools work great. I saw a short list of other ones that have similar tools. I think Vercel does something similar. There's a bunch of static hosts that do similar GitHub integration, automatically deploying whatever's in the latest in your GitHub. Setting up your site on a static host like Netlify is also really straightforward, and it's all done via the web. You don't have to do any terminal stuff. You don't have to know how to set up a server. You tell it about your GitHub repository, and it tells you how to update your DNS. So if you are looking to employ one of these practices and you don't want to be, and you're using some kind of older or a more traditional web host that you're SSHing or STPing up to, moving to a host like Netlify or Cloudflare pages isn't all that complicated. It can be done pretty quickly, as depending on the longest thing is probably going to be your TTL on your domain. If you're deploying to GitHub pages or via SSH or FTP or rsync or anything else or another target, automating that process does require some domain-specific knowledge. If you're a web developer or a writer and not an infrastructure engineer, I've tried to create a resource for users in that scenario, and that is over here. This will be in the show notes, I think, but at 11T GitHub deployment at my GitHub profile. I have created GitHub actions and workflows, which you can use to automate your deployment process to GitHub Pages, which is GitHub's static web host, an SSH server, an FTP server. Don't do this. Or even does manual releases. Like if you want to just have it build and export your code for you to deliver somewhere else automatically on GitHub. I also have an example project of a site doing this. This is 11D deployment GitHub Pages example, and it automatically deploys anytime I make a change. You can see over here, it has the tools that in the other repository integrate with GitHub's built-in deployment monitoring situation. So I can actually click on deployments and see here's the actual URL of the page. I didn't type any of this. This is automatic. It creates this list of deployments of all the ones that have ever happened. This is when it wasn't working. And it gives me a link to the page at the top. I've gone a step further and automated releases when when a deploy is completed successfully, another automated task is kicked off, which creates a release, which gives me an idea of when it was that I need to clean this up, but this is an idea of the page that's been released, the date and time that it was released, and here is the actual built directory and a copy of the source code from that moment in time. I hope so that's basically all I have, what I've prepared. I hope this gives you a basic understanding of the practice of continuous deployment and how you can use that practice to deploy 11T and taking the manual steps out of your process if you have any, to assure that your site's always up to date with your source code and Git. If you have any questions, let's